I remember that season so clearly, wildfires blazing through Los Angeles, floods sweeping across towns in America, and hearts everywhere shaken by loss. But even before the flames and waters came, there was a whisper not in the wind but in the spirit. God had already been speaking. He always does. The question is, were we listening? You see, divine warnings rarely arrive with thunder or lightning. They often come softly through a dream, a sermon, a friend's gentle word. Many people brushed them off, thought it was just imagination. But those who paused long enough to hear that still, small voice, they found safety in the storm. When I heard those stories of people who'd been warned and spared, I couldn't help but think of how many times God had tried to reach me the same way. Not through disaster, but through direction. Maybe it was that moment when something inside said, "Don't go there today," or "Call that person," or "Wait." I've learned those little promptings are not coincidence. They are protection. God doesn't just prepare us for blessings, He prepares us for battles too. And if we'll listen, He'll lead us around dangers we never even knew were coming. I believe the tragedy isn't only in the fires or the floods. It's in the moments when heaven was calling, but we were too busy to answer. The truth is, God doesn't stop warning because we stop listening. His love is too stubborn for that. He'll keep sending reminders, keep tugging on our hearts, keep whispering, "Come back to me." Sometimes His warning isn't about disaster at all, it's about direction. Maybe He's trying to tell you, "This relationship isn't good for you," or "Don't compromise your peace for approval." Maybe He's not trying to scare you, He's trying to save you. What looks like restriction is often God's redirection. And when you obey that inner nudge, you'll realize later it wasn't about fear, it was about favor. The fires and floods of life will come. None of us can avoid every storm. But those who listen, those who stay tuned to that quiet voice of the Spirit, will always find a place of safety, even when the world shakes. Because God never leaves His children unprepared. He's not just a rescuer in disaster, He's a guide before it ever begins. So today, maybe He's speaking again, not to frighten you, but to prepare you. The question is, will you listen this time? It started quietly, no thunder, no flashing lights, just a whisper. Latifat, soft, gentle, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. The first time it happened, she laughed it off. The second time, she questioned herself. The third time, she grew uneasy. She looked around the room, saw no one there. Her husband was outside fixing the car. The children were at school. The house silent, except for that voice that knew her name. Sometimes God doesn't shout, He whispers. And when He whispers, it's because He wants us close enough to hear. But in the noise of our daily lives, we often miss it. We rush from one thing to another, weighed down by bills, deadlines, worries. We call it exhaustion, stress, coincidence, but heaven calls it invitation. I've learned that when God wants to speak, He often begins with something simple, something ordinary, a name, a feeling, a nudge. Before He reveals His plan, He first asks for our attention. Think about it. Moses didn't meet God in a palace. He met Him in a burning bush in the middle of nowhere. Elijah didn't hear Him in the earthquake or the fire, but in a whisper on the mountain. Sometimes we keep waiting for the dramatic, while God is saying, "Can you hear me in the quiet?" Latifat didn't know it then, but that whisper was the sound of destiny stirring. She thought it was fatigue, but it was a father calling his daughter by name. How many times has God tried to get our attention like that? Maybe not with an audible voice, but with a restlessness, a dream, a thought that won't leave your heart. You feel something pulling you to pray, to forgive, to start again, to trust. You don't understand it, but deep down, you know it's not random. When I look back on my own life, I realize some of the greatest turning points began with the smallest whispers. Joel, stay in peace. Joel, let it go. Joel, Keep believing. At the time, they didn't make sense. But later I could see God was preparing me for something greater, just as he was preparing Latifat. Maybe right now you've been hearing your name in your own way. Maybe it's through the uneasiness in your heart or the scripture that keeps coming back to you. Don't ignore it. Don't dismiss it as stress or coincidence. That whisper is not meant to confuse you, it's meant to call you higher. God is saying, I see you. I haven't forgotten you. Listen, because what's coming next will change everything. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that feels safe in its routine. The sun was warm, the streets familiar, life steady and predictable. Latifat had just finished shopping, humming along to the radio as she waited at a red light. And then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. A truck ran the signal. Metal screamed against metal. Time froze. In an instant, the world she knew disappeared. They said her heart stopped for 8 minutes. But in those 8 minutes, she woke up to a reality more alive than this one. When she left her body, there was no fear, no pain, no confusion, just peace. She saw the crushed car, the flashing lights, the paramedics working frantically. But she wasn't afraid for herself. She wanted to tell them, I'm okay. Don't cry. Have you ever noticed how, even in the darkest moments, God has a way of surrounding you with peace that makes no sense to the world? That's his presence. It doesn't wait for calm seas. It shows up in the middle of the storm. I've talked to people who've gone through their own 8-minute moments, the accident, the diagnosis, the lost moments when the ground beneath them gave way. And yet, somehow, in that space between life and death, fear and faith, they found something holy. That's what Latifat discovered. What looked like tragedy was really transformation. What seemed like an ending was the beginning of her awakening. Maybe you've never been in a literal car crash, but you've been hit by something unexpected, a betrayal, a setback, a heartbreak that left you breathless. It felt like everything you built shattered in one collision. But friend, hear me, God can meet you even there. Sometimes he allows the crash not to destroy you, but to wake you up. To lift you above the noise of this world so you can see what truly matters. When Latifat looked down and saw her broken car, she also saw her life with new eyes. She realized how fragile it all is, how much time we spend worrying about things that won't last. But above all, she felt that peace, not the peace that comes from having everything perfect, but the peace that comes from knowing you're held by something eternal. That's what God offers to every one of us. A peace that passes understanding, a love that outlasts every wreck and every wound. The accident didn't end her story, it revealed it. And maybe that's true for you too. Sometimes what looks like the worst day of your life is really the day heaven starts speaking your name again. She said it felt like waking up inside a sunrise. One moment everything was dark, crushed metal, chaos, sirens, and the next there was light. Not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that welcomes you home. Latifat found herself in a place more alive than anything she had ever seen. Every color sang, every breath shimmered with warmth. She realized she wasn't dreaming. She was standing in eternity, and there, in that radiant peace, stood a figure she somehow already knew. His eyes were like fire, but gentle, the kind of fire that doesn't burn, it purifies. His smile could have lit the universe. Latifat, he said, the same voice that had whispered her name for months. In that moment, she knew it was Jesus. What struck her most wasn't fear or shock. It was love. Pure, unconditional, overwhelming love. She said, it felt like every question I'd ever asked was answered without a word. That's what happens in God's presence. You stop needing explanations because you finally understand the heart behind everything. I think about that often, how sometimes, here on earth, we wrestle so hard to understand why something happened. We ask, God, why did this door close? Why didn't you stop the accident? Why this pain? But in his presence, all the whys fade, and what remains is peace that says, I was there all along. Latifah described heaven not as a dream, but as the truest reality. This world, she said, felt like the shadow. That world was the substance. She walked through what looked like golden fields where light itself seemed to sing. Flowers whispered melodies of joy. Even the air felt alive. And in that beauty, Jesus didn't give her a sermon, he gave her himself. He simply said, this is what earth was meant to be, this is what it will be again. Isn't that just like God? He doesn't just save us from something, he saves us for something. When I heard her story, I thought, how many of us miss the glimpses of heaven that God tries to show us right here on earth? A baby's laugh, a sunrise after a hard night. A moment when forgiveness finally wins. Heaven leaks through in the smallest things if we have eyes to see. Latifah's encounter reminds us that Jesus isn't far away, he's closer than breath, calling each of us by name, inviting us to see beyond the pain, beyond the noise, into something eternal. One day, we'll see that same light. But until then, we can live like heaven's already started right here, right now, in every act of love. She said Jesus took her by the hand and led her into a place she could hardly describe, a vast hall shimmering with light, yet filled with the sound of weeping. It wasn't the sorrowful kind of crying we know on earth. It was deeper, like the echo of love breaking for a world that's lost its way. She saw angels, strong, radiant beings kneeling, their tears falling like rivers of light. And at the center of that hall was what looked like a screen showing scenes from earth. Hungry children, divided families, wars, people hurting one another, churches fighting instead of loving. Jesus said, this is the hall of tears. Every time someone suffers, every time love is rejected, heaven feels it too. That moment changed her. She realized heaven isn't distant, it feels every heartbeat of humanity. When you cry, heaven cries with you. When you forgive, heaven rejoices. I think sometimes we forget that. We imagine God is far away, busy with bigger things. But the truth is, there's not a single tear that falls from your eyes that goes unnoticed. Scripture says he collects them in a bottle. That's how personal his love is. Then Jesus took her into another room brighter than the first. The walls were lined with glowing scrolls, each one pulsing with light. He walked over, pulled one down, and said, this one is yours. Her name was written across it in letters made of living light. As he opened it, she saw her story, every detail of her life, past and future, moments she'd forgotten, choices she hadn't yet made, people she would touch. It wasn't just a record, it was a blueprint. Her purpose, her calling, her destiny. She saw herself speaking to crowds, telling this very story, warning people to turn back to God, reminding them that time is shorter than they think. Some listened, some laughed, some walked away angry. But she understood her job wasn't to convince, it was to carry the message. Friend, you have a scroll too. God wrote your name in light long before you took your first breath. You may not see it, but it exists, filled with divine appointments, people you're meant to bless, lives you're meant to touch. Maybe life's noise has made you forget, but the author hasn't stopped writing. Every act of kindness, every prayer, every moment of courage, it's all ink on your scroll. When Latifah saw hers, she didn't just learn her purpose, she remembered it. And maybe that's what God is trying to do for you right now, to remind you that you were never random, never forgotten, and your story is still being written by the hands of love. Jesus led her to what looked like a great calendar, but it wasn't like anything she'd ever seen on earth. It wasn't made of paper or numbers, it was alive. Each month shimmered like golden fire, and instead of days, it held events. She could see history, not as lines of time, but as waves of purpose. Jesus pointed to one part glowing brighter than the rest. October, he said softly. This is when it begins. On that heavenly calendar were appointments, not man's plans, but God's. Moments when heaven would interrupt history to wake a sleeping world. And written across them were 4 trumpet symbols, each one shining brighter than the last. 4 trumpets will sound, Jesus said, each one a warning not to destroy but to awaken. When I first heard that, it made me think God still speaks through signs. He still uses seasons to reach our hearts. The question isn't whether he's speaking, it's whether we're paying attention. Sometimes we think the chaos of the world means God has gone silent, but often it means his voice is growing louder. Those trumpets might not be literal sounds in the sky. They might be the moments that shake us out of our comfort, a loss, a sudden change, a wake-up call that reminds us life is fragile and time is short. I remember a time in my own life when I thought everything was settled, the church was growing, life was good, and then, out of nowhere, everything shifted. Doors closed that I thought would stay open. People I depended on walked away. I didn't know it then, but that was one of God's trumpets in my life, not to punish me, but to position me. Sometimes God has to shake what's comfortable to awaken what's eternal. That's what those heavenly trumpets represent, mercy disguised as warning. Each one a call to look up, to turn our hearts back toward what truly matters. The first may sound gentle, the next louder, but all of them carry the same message. Wake up, my people, don't sleep through your purpose. Maybe today you're hearing your own trumpet. Maybe it's a restlessness you can't explain, a door closing, a stirring in your spirit that says, there's more. Don't ignore it. Don't dismiss it as coincidence. God's calendar doesn't run on human clocks, it runs on divine timing. And when he marks a moment, it means something is about to shift. The beautiful thing is, every trumpet isn't a threat, it's an invitation. Heaven saying, it's not too late. There's still time to turn, to trust, to be ready. Because even when the world shakes, those who walk closely with God will never lose their peace. They'll recognize his voice in the sound of the trumpet, the voice of love calling his children home. When Jesus spoke of the 4 trumpets, he wasn't just talking about noise from heaven, he was talking about moments that would awaken the world. Each trumpet, he said, would sound louder than the last, not to frighten, but to remind humanity that love is still reaching out. The first trumpet would echo from the heart of Jerusalem, where archaeologists would uncover an ancient scroll glowing with truth, proof that God's love has never belonged to just one nation or people. Its message would shake the world, reminding us that heaven's heart beats for everyone. And though some would deny it, others would feel something stir inside, a call to unity, to grace, to the love that transcends walls and labels. The second trumpet would rise, not from pulpits or cathedrals, but from living rooms, coffee shops, and city parks. Jesus said revival would no longer fit within walls. Young people would lead songs that sound more like heartbeats than hymns. They'd gather in unexpected places, singing in different languages, painting, praying, feeding the poor, turning worship back into love in action. I believe we're already seeing that faith becoming less about religion and more about relationship. When I meet young believers today, I see a fire in them that can't be contained. They don't care about titles, they care about truth. Then, the third trumpet, a light in the sky. A new star, brighter than any planet, visible to every eye. Scientists will search for explanations, but hearts will already know. Heaven is speaking. People will dream again. Children will see angels. Families will gather to pray, not out of fear but awe. God will remind us that he's not far away. He's writing messages in the heavens, still calling our names. And then the fourth trumpet, the one that changes everything. Miracles in the poorest places, provision where there was none, food appearing on tables, wells springing up in deserts, kindness blooming where hope had died. Jesus said cities would feel his footsteps, not everyone would see him, but those who did would never be the same. Corruption would crumble, truth would shine, and those who gave with open hearts would find their blessings multiplying like never before. I believe those trumpets aren't about destruction, they're about awakening. God isn't shouting in anger, He's calling in love. Each sign, each miracle, each movement of compassion is His way of saying, I'm still here, I still care. And it's not too late. Friend, the sound of heaven isn't a warning to run, it's an invitation to return, to wake up, to love again, to be part of the miracle He's bringing to the world right now. After the trumpets sounded, Latifat said the world began to look different, not just in what people saw, but in what they became. She described how cities started changing, as if invisible hands were painting light and shadow across the earth. Some places glowed not because of wealth or technology, but because of love. Neighbors helped neighbors, crime faded, hope felt like the air people breathed. They called them cities of light, and yet other cities dimmed. Fear ruled their streets. Division, greed, and hate grew like weeds. They became cities of darkness. The difference wasn't geography, it was heart. People weren't just choosing where to live. They were choosing what kind of world to belong to. When I think about that, I realize every day we're making that same choice. We decide whether we'll build light or add to the dark. It's not about governments or grand gestures, it's in the small things. It's when you forgive instead of holding a grudge, when you choose honesty over convenience, when you lift someone who can't repay you. Light isn't a place, it's a person who's decided to reflect God in a world that's forgotten how. Latifat said the most surprising part was who God used to lead the change. It wasn't the famous, the wealthy, or the powerful. It was the children, innocent hearts that still believed in goodness. It was the refugees who had lost everything but still carried faith. It was the people who'd been broken, the ones society overlooked, the ones who said, I've been through darkness, but I'm not staying there. And through them, revival spread faster than anyone could explain. Cities began to heal, not because of policy, but because of compassion. I think about that a lot, how God always chooses the unexpected. David was a shepherd, Moses stuttered, Mary was a teenage girl in a small village. God doesn't look for perfection, He looks for availability. Maybe that's why light grows best in the darkest places, because that's where it's needed most. And here's the beauty of it. Even in the cities of darkness, the light never gave up. People fled the chaos to find peace, but others stayed to rebuild it. They prayed in the streets, started feeding the hungry, caring for the forgotten, and slowly the light began to push back the night. Friend, maybe you look around today and think the world's too far gone. But remember, God's plan has always been to change the world through ordinary people who simply choose love. You don't need a pulpit to preach. Your kindness, your faith, your forgiveness, that's the sermon. Every time you choose light, heaven notices. And together, one act at a time, we turn this world into a city that shines again. When Jesus looked at Latifat, His eyes were full of love, but also purpose. He said, You have to go back. She didn't want to. Who would? She was standing in perfect peace, in beauty beyond words, in the presence of love Himself. But Jesus said, Your story isn't finished yet. There's something you must tell them. He explained that a time was coming, and in many ways had already begun, when every person would face a choice that could no longer be postponed. Not a choice of religion or reputation, but a choice between light and darkness, between love and fear, between self and surrender. He said, every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every choice to love, it's revealing your side. The same is true of every act of pride, hatred, or greed. The line between heaven and earth is being drawn not by angels but by hearts. I think about that often. We imagine the great decisions of life happen in big moments, but most of them happen quietly. It's not when the cameras are on us, it's when no one's watching. It's when you decide to speak peace instead of anger, to bless instead of curse, to give when you could have taken. That's the choice between light and dark. And Jesus was saying it's already happening. The world is being divided not by color or country, but by character. Latifat said she felt terrified. Lord, how can I tell them? She asked. Who will believe me? And Jesus smiled, that same calm, steady smile that melts every fear, and said, You don't have to convince them, you just have to tell them. Plant the seed. I'll take care of the harvest. Isn't that beautiful? He wasn't asking for perfection, just obedience. He doesn't need eloquence, he needs availability. When I heard her story, it reminded me that we all have a commission. Maybe God isn't asking you to stand before crowds, but He is asking you to be light where you are at your job, in your home, in your community. Every time you show love, when the world shows hate, you're preaching the gospel without saying a word. Jesus told Latifat, the separation has already begun. And maybe you can feel it too, that sense that the world is changing, that something spiritual is stirring beneath the headlines. But here's the hope. Light always wins. Darkness never drives out darkness. Only light can do that. And that light is already in you. So go shine. Love deeply. Forgive freely. Live boldly. Because every day, in every choice, you're showing heaven which side your heart belongs to, and heaven is watching with joy. When Latifat opened her eyes in that hospital room 5 days after the crash, it felt like waking up between two worlds. The beeping of machines, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, all of it felt so small compared to where she had just been. Her husband sat beside her, his eyes red from nights of worry, but she smiled. I came back, she whispered, and in that moment she knew why. She hadn't been sent back to live the same life. She'd been sent to deliver a message, a call for hearts to awaken before it's too late. She said, The trumpets are already sounding, not from the sky, but from within the moments we keep ignoring. Every act of hate, every moment of pride, every refusal to forgive, it's all the sound of a world drifting away from love. But every act of mercy, every quiet prayer, every moment of kindness, that's heaven breaking through again. She began to tell people, Don't wait for another sign. You're already in the middle of one. And I believe that's true for us too. Sometimes we keep waiting for lightning in the sky or a booming voice from heaven, but most of the time, God's warnings come softly through a conviction in your heart, a message that touches your soul, a moment that stops you in your tracks and says, It's time to come home. She reminded everyone that preparation isn't about fear, it's about love. It's about getting your heart right, letting go of bitterness, forgiving people who don't deserve it, because that's what God did for us. It's about choosing compassion over criticism and prayer over panic. She would say, You don't need to have everything figured out, you just need to start talking to Him again. That's what a real relationship with God looks like, not perfection, but connection. I think about how fragile life is. One moment we're at a red light, the next moment we're standing before eternity. That's why Scripture says now is the time of salvation. Not tomorrow, not next month, not when life calms down now. Maybe God's been tugging at your heart lately. Maybe you've felt that quiet nudge, that whisper saying, It's time to forgive. It's time to believe again. That's your trumpet. Don't ignore it. Latifat said that after she returned, the memories of heaven didn't fade. They grew clearer each day. And the message that burned in her heart was this: time is short, but hope is not. The light is still calling. The invitation still stands. And it's as simple as this: love God, love people, and be ready. Because when the final trumpet sounds, it won't be to frighten us, it will be the sound of home calling us back where we belong.